Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kat. So today's video is my very late January and February wrap up. I thought that I would try out doing this bi-monthly because I don't really read a lot to be able to do a full wrap up every single month. I just thought it would be more satisfying this way, more entertaining. So yeah, let me know what you think, if you prefer this more often or if you enjoy it this way. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, let's get into the books. The first book that I read in January right at the start was during a 24-hour readathon with my sister, and that is The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman. This is also illustrated by Riddell, who is my favorite illustrator, and it's just such a gorgeous retelling of Sleeping Beauty. So yeah, it's a retelling of a fairy tale. It's kind of twisted, and there's this really great plot twist at the end that I wasn't expecting at all, that I think made the story so much more interesting. There was a lot of humor in this as well. There were dwarf characters, and it really gave me Tolkien vibes. So the whole time that I was reading this, which was like literally a couple of hours, maybe less, I was listening to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, I think specifically the Fellowship of the Ring, and this really got me in the fantasy vibe. It was really magical. I really adore Neil Gaiman's storytelling. I do think though that Riddell, definitely his illustration kind of brings Neil Gaiman's stories to life, and I do wonder whether we didn't have the illustrations, whether I would enjoy it as much. So for that reason, I think I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, so I definitely think that the story itself could have had a bit more development. It could have been a bit longer to allow for more character development, because I felt like our kind of main character, like queen person, wasn't like fully realized. Like I think she could have been way cooler if we just found out more about her, if she got a bit more dialogue, that kind of thing. It was a very like detached kind of fairy tale style and tone. I did really enjoy it, and I'm so glad that I started this one to kick off the new year. The next book that I actually read during that same 24-hour readathon was Watering the Soul by Courtney Peppernell, and honestly holding this makes me very, very happy because this was my first 5-star of the year. It's just some of my favorite poetry that I've read so far on my like very short recent poetry journey. This one is essentially about like nurturing your soul and really like taking the time for self-care and being kind to yourself and stuff like that. And it's basically written in parts, so kind of like the stages to growing your soul. So for example, the first part is slow down, and all of the poems kind of go along with that theme in each section. And then at the beginning of each section, you've also got this little illustration, which makes me so happy. Like I love this style. I think there's like going to be a theme with this video that illustrations like make everything better. And honestly, I feel like art and books go really well together, and I wish there was more art in books. Yeah, it's just such a like comforting style of art to go along with the comforting poems. And yeah, I just felt like myself being healed, and yeah, I would definitely like read this again and again whenever I need like a little bit of a pick-me-up or whatever. And honestly, this is definitely like one of my biggest recommendations if you're trying to get into poetry. I think starting with something like this, which is obviously modern poetry, a bit more accessible, but also with parts, it kind of makes poetry less intimidating. At least I found it like that. Definitely recommend this one. I haven't read any more of Courtney Peppernell's poetry, but I do plan on doing so. I recently picked up Pillow Thoughts from my local Waterstones. I think I'm going to start that one definitely in March, if not today. The last book that I finished during that 24-hour readathon was Poems to Fall in Love With, which is a collection chosen and illustrated by Riddell again. This one is a collection with a mixture of old poetry, more modern poetry, and all of it is about love in whatever form. So whether that's friendship, family love, like your parents or your sibling, or romantic love. Unfortunately, I didn't like as many of these poems, or like I didn't love or connect with as many of these poems as I did with Watering the Soul. I think maybe reading this straight after that wasn't the best idea because I was on such a high from that book. I definitely found a few that I really liked. It was more like a handful than the majority. I think the main reason that I gave it 4 stars instead of the 3 stars that the actual collection maybe deserved was because of the illustrations, and that's fine because that's like a big part of the book. But yeah, probably in terms of the actual poetry in there, for my personal enjoyment, I think would be more like 3 stars. The next book that I finished in January was The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I read the majority of this nearly 2 years ago now, in the summer of 2020, during like the first like major lockdown. I was like in the garden just like flying through this. Like I loved the beginning so much. It was such a vibe, it was so comforting, And yeah, when I'd read The Sleeper and the Spindle, I felt the need to get back into fantasy, so I picked this up at my parents' house. This is my copy, but I read their copy. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. I just found it really lovely to learn more about the characters and get like obviously a way more in-depth version than we got with the films, and I'm so obsessed with the films. Like, the films were my entire childhood. It's definitely my favorite movie franchise. Even though I really enjoyed the majority of this book, I found that the pacing was very slow. But yeah, the pace of this one kind of took away a little bit from the enjoyment, and I was very aware at certain points that I was like trying to get through it, and I wasn't really like, you know, wrapped up in the world and like lost like I like with my fantasy books. So for that reason, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars, which a lot of people might say is like blasphemy. My mum was like, what? Like, how did you give it 4 out of 5 stars? But then my dad swooped in and said that he did too. So this next book is Here is the Beehive by Crossan, and this is a story told in verse actually, so you can see it was a very quick read. So this one my colleague actually gifted to me, my fellow bookseller. She's fantastic and she has the best recommendations. She thought it was worth me trying, and this is about a woman who enters into an affair with a married man, and this isn't a spoiler, but he dies. And she obviously hasn't told anybody. It's this massive secret that she even knows him like that. But yeah, obviously they have this relationship and nobody else knows, so she has to kind of like go through it alone. Like, she has to mourn this relationship and mourn this man that she loved by herself. And then you find out like way more, and it's so messy, and honestly you end up, well, I ended up just not liking her at all. She's like one of the most unlikable protagonists I've ever read, and a lot of the characters were actually like, they were all super flawed, and for that reason it kind of reminded me or gave me the vibe of Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. So if you do like that book, I think you would probably like this as well, like I did. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars because although I cried at the end, it just didn't really blow me away. It didn't like really give me like very strong feelings or anything until like right at the end. I don't even know why I cried, to be honest. But I will say that this one, out of most of the ones that I've talked about so far, not including Watering the Soul, is the one that has like stayed with me, and I have thought about it, and when I see it in the bookshop I'm like, oh, I really like hope that I'm able to recommend this to somebody, because I think it is a really good recommendation, especially like I said, if you like the kind of Sally Rooney type romances and like characters and stuff. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. Like I didn't really know how to feel about this one. So the next read of January was The Sad Ghost Club 2, and this one obviously follows on from the first one, which is about a group of cute ghosts. They all kind of like have problems with like depression and anxiety, and obviously that kind of makes it hard for them to socialize and like meet friends and, you know, do stuff like go to parties. And honestly, I think a lot of us can relate to that kind of feeling. So yeah, it's a really relatable, warm, cute book, and it's told in a way that's really, really positive and hopeful. But I didn't enjoy this one as much as the first one because we are following the second character from the first one rather than the main character, if that makes sense. It kind of like switches perspective. I think I just liked, like, and personally connected with the character in the first one. I was kind of sad that we didn't get as much of them, so I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. It was still really lovely, and I do recommend this series a lot. Okay, so the next read of January was an audiobook, and that was For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing, and this one was absolutely fantastic. I ended up getting it because Riley Marie recommended it, and when Riley recommends a book that like sounds at all appealing to me, it's like usually spot on for my taste. And yeah, I gave this a go because she said it was like you vibes, and it definitely had that tone to it. We follow multiple points of view, but the main point of view that we follow is this teacher who basically is playing like the puppet master of his students, doing what is within his powers as a teacher to kind of like affect their lives in like the most twisted way. And obviously the title For Your Own Good, like he thinks he's doing the right thing, and it's just really messed up. And then it turns into like this whole kind of murder kind of like mystery. Multiple people get murdered and it gets a bit ridiculous at some point, but that's exactly what I mean when I say it's kind of like you. I think everyone who's watched that that can agree that it gets kind of ridiculous to a point where that would never happen, but it's just really entertaining. So yeah, this one was super fun. I definitely recommend the audiobook. I think it was narrated really well. The only thing that let it down was the ending. The ending wasn't as satisfying as it could have been, to be honest. It wasn't like very explosive, because that kind of seemed like where it was leading, because it was such high stakes, and then the ending kind of like fizzled out the tiniest bit. So yeah, just didn't keep up the energy from earlier on in the book, and that's why I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in January was Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, and this was a reread for me. I think it's the only book that I've reread this year so far, because I don't really do rereads unless I think a book is very worthy of one, because I'm kind of a slow reader. Like, there's something so special about it. First time around I gave it, I think, 4.5 stars. This time around I bumped it up to 5 stars, because what the hell was I thinking? It's so good. Like, it's my perfect romance, I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, to be honest, in my eyes anyway. I know that a lot of people find it really difficult because it's an age gap romance, but it's also boyfriend's dad trope. So it's kind of like those two things, which are usually like really taboo, and then together. But I think Penelope Douglas does a fantastic job at developing these characters, developing the romance, the chemistry. This couple has my favorite chemistry in any book, like including like fantasy, romance, smart, like anything. If you didn't know, Birthday Girl, the reason it's called Birthday Girl is because Jordan is stood up by her boyfriend on her birthday at the cinema. She ends up accidentally getting into a conversation with this older guy, and they really hit it off, like not in a romantic way, but like just they obviously, like I said, have a lot of chemistry and really get on. And then afterwards she finds out that that's her boyfriend's dad, who she hasn't met yet because they have a very complicated relationship. Then they end up having to move in with him because her boyfriend is kind of an idiot. I don't know why I love this book so much, but yeah, 5 out of 5 stars, would recommend to a friend. Okay, another poetry collection for you guys, if you're not sick of them already. This is Flower, Crowns and Fearsome Things by Amanda Lovelace, and I picked this up because I think it was actually during my book buying ban in January, but me and my colleague decided to get these anyway because it looks so fantastic. So this is kind of inspired by Persephone, and it's about the duality of being a woman and how you can be soft but you can also be powerful. Like, you can be contradictory, you know? Very cheesy, I know. And a lot of the poems in here were kind of cliched, and that's one reason why I didn't love this poetry collection. I still really enjoyed certain poems. Yeah, I really like the imagery in this one. I think it was really lovely, kind of cottagecore vibes and like light academia. Yes, I'm so excited we got to this point in the video because this is one of my favorite books of all time now, and that is Verity by Colleen Hoover. Who would have thought? This is my first Colleen Hoover book and it's a hit. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, obviously. Like, I can get that out of the way now. Fantastic, would like reread it tomorrow. I wish, this is like one of the books where I wish I could read it again for the first time, and I'm so jealous of you if you haven't read it and you're planning on reading it. I mean, to be fair, some people don't enjoy it as much as I do. I think it's because I had kind of semi-low expectations going into this. So it's about this writer called Lowen, and she's basically been hired, or like agrees to write the end or like finish a series of this author who, for whatever like kind of mysterious medical reasons, can't finish her series. The author is Verity. Lowen ends up going and staying in Verity's house with Verity's husband and son, so she has to do a lot of research in Verity's old office. While Lowen is in this house, weird things start to happen. Eventually Lowen finds like a kind of draft copy of a biography that Verity wrote that nobody knows about. It reveals some really disturbing secrets of Verity's, and then all the weird stuff happens. It was actually really scary. It kind of kept me up at night, and I ended up binge reading this in the space of like 48 hours. So there are no tabs on this section of the book, which is the last section, because I was so into it. I was like, I can't even pause, I can't even take a breath to put a tab in. But yeah, freaking love this one, and I'm definitely going to be reading one of Colleen Hoover's books soon. Another audiobook I listened to towards the end of January was Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix. Now this is my second book that I attempted to read by Grady Hendrix. The first one was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I can't believe I actually got that right, wow. Which I was kind of buddy reading with Caitlin from Kate Literature, and we both kind of just got bored at the same time. I got about 2/3 of the way through and it just wasn't what I was expecting at all. Yeah, it wasn't as good as I thought it would be, considering like how many people talk about it and like hype it up and stuff. But Horrorstor was the Grady Hendrix that I really desperately wanted to read. You can see that it looks like an IKEA catalogue. Basically, these employees kind of volunteer to stay in the store overnight because some weird things are happening during the day that they can't explain, and they need to make sure that they get down to the bottom of what's going on in the store. Basically, the way the book was described was that it would be like zombies, and it kind of was, but it wasn't. Very on theme with how I felt about the other Grady Hendrix that I read. It just went down a path that I wasn't expecting and didn't necessarily like it wasn't surprising and like interesting to me. It was more just like, oh, like if I knew that this was like the vibe and the tone, then I wouldn't necessarily have been so excited about this. I did end up finishing this one, and I think that's purely because it was an audiobook. The main plot just like went a bit sour for me. Like it just got a bit too unhinged, a bit too disturbing. I just felt a bit sick reading Horrorstor, to be honest. So I ended up giving that one 3 out of 5 stars. Those are all the books that I read in January. Obviously that was like 12 books or something. For February, I'm only going to be talking about 2 books because I only finished 1 book in the entirety of the month, and the other one was a DNF. The one book that I did finish in February was The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura. Essentially the narrator of the story, the protagonist, I guess. Essentially she's stalking the woman in the purple skirt. The author did a really good job in developing the narrative so much so that you almost view this like stalking or like this obsession as normal, and almost like to a point where it's justified because you're also super intrigued by the woman in the purple skirt. So yeah, it's really like voyeuristic, and it makes you think about like how freaking nosy we are as people, but also it's about loneliness. The main character certainly is lonely, and you really feel for her in the end, but also she's just a bit weird. Even though I didn't love it, I ended up like kind of speeding through this on my commute to work. It didn't quite leave a lasting impression on me, so for that reason I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I like the way it was written and I did enjoy it. The last book that I'm going to talk about today is going to end this video on kind of a low note because it was my one DNF from the entire 2 months of reading, and that is Shiver by Allie Reynolds. Now this one I bought like a year ago, and I was really excited about it. I found it in a charity shop and I was like, this sounds so good. It's obviously a thriller set in the mountains. I think it's set in the Alps, and the main character is a snowboarder, and it's this murder mystery, and there's 2 timelines. And a lot of the time, even if I'm not like thinking that a thriller is the best or a murder mystery is the best thing ever, I will still get to the end to find out who did it and find out like how and why and all of those things, because usually when someone gets murdered you want to know the answer. But this unfortunately was some of the worst writing I've ever read in my entire life. This was so bad. I don't know how this was published. I don't know how this got through so many stages of publishing, because at the very least it was a bad book, but it was also offensive to women. Like there were so many offensive moments where I was just like, excuse me? So I ended up DNFing this at page 66. The writing was really basic. It was actually kind of confusing at times as well. Like I didn't know where they were or what they were talking about because there was no description whatsoever. And you'd think, considering that it's such like an interesting setting, she would have kind of like set the scene a bit more. There was absolutely no atmosphere. It's about setting the tone and setting this creepy atmosphere that you need for a thriller, and this one just came off more like an episode story. I don't know if you've ever played those games called like episodes or chapters. I used to play that when I was a teenager, and honestly it was the best time of my life. At the same time, like those stories, if you know, are very basic and very cliched, sometimes offensive, sometimes problematic, not good, but some of them at least had the drama that you're interested in, whereas this had drama but it just wasn't intriguing enough for me to carry on reading. Also, these characters did not change one bit in the 10-year time jump. They were so two-dimensional. Like, it treats the reader like an idiot because you're kind of telling us every single thing, and like things that are really unnecessary and that you could just like infer. Like, she'd like infer it in one sentence and then in the next sentence basically spell it out and be like, oh, this is what you should have gotten from that, by the way. Yeah, I could probably rant about this for days, but I'm gonna stop now because yeah, I'm convinced that if I carried on reading that I would have given it 1 star and I would have hated myself. Sorry for ending this video on a low note with that DNF. Hopefully that doesn't happen in the next couple of months. If you've read any of these books, let me know all of your thoughts, because I'd really like to know, especially if you disagree with me. If you've read Shiva, please talk to me about it in the comment section, because I need someone to rant with, honestly. I did read some of these during vlogs, so what I will do is link the vlogs that they are in so you can go back and watch those if you haven't, if you're interested to see more kind of in-depth thoughts of how I was feeling at the time that I was reading. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!